The modern feminist movement, which initially championed women's suffrage and property rights, laid the groundwork for a broader notion of collective responsibility. Early activists, including suffragettes who advocated for social, political, and economic equality, framed their demands in terms of a moral imperative for society. Over time, the quest for equality intertwined with efforts to protect vulnerable groups and address social injustices, leading governments to adopt increasingly interventionist roles. This pursuit of what was seen as fundamental fairness positioned the state in a quasi-parental role, fostering an expectation among the public that government policies should proactively mitigate risks and guide societal development under the guise of benevolence. As feminist rhetoric influenced government agendas, a cultural acceptance of top-down authority emerged, setting the stage for an expanded nanny state acting as a moral guardian. This nanny state concept, entrenched through welfare policies and regulatory frameworks aimed at ensuring security, soon transcended mere material concerns. Beyond social programs and economic safeguards, legislation began to shape the realm of ideas, regulating speech, guiding behavior, and promoting a government-endorsed ethical framework. Officials, intent on preventing discrimination or offense, enacted measures that underscored the state's role in moderating personal choices. With each legislative step, the scope of individual liberties shrank, promoting a culture where discourse and thought were increasingly managed. Media often supported these initiatives, highlighting perceived threats that seemingly necessitated state intervention. Consequently, this environment established government entities, rather than families or local communities, as the primary arbiters of personal safety and moral standards. Simultaneously, socialist tendencies found fertile ground within this burgeoning nanny state framework. As governance became synonymous with paternalistic oversight, calls for wealth redistribution, comprehensive social programs, and universal entitlements naturally dovetailed with overarching directives. Significant portions of the population were encouraged to depend on subsidies or grants, with assurances that the government could level the playing field for everyone. This trend led to increasingly complex policies governing wages, healthcare, education, and lifestyle choices, predicated on the belief that no one should be left behind and that collective solutions should address all adversities. These shifts were often justified by appeals to progressive ideals, suggesting that true equality required an extensive and vigilant governmental presence, resulting in an intricate web of regulations dictating the minutiae of public life and discourse. In this evolving socialist model, state responsibilities expanded into areas like immigration and border control. Advocates argued that a compassionate, progressive government should embrace diverse cultural and ideological backgrounds, even when signs of potential violence or militancy were present. Proponents of liberal immigration policies believed this was morally necessary for promoting tolerance and inclusivity. However, the reluctance to differentiate between ideologies that posed real threats and those that were merely different led to the admission of individuals who later exploited these freedoms. Despite warnings from intelligence and law enforcement about radical elements, the dominant narrative of non-discrimination and openness often trumped these concerns, limiting the scrutiny of dangerous ideologies in the interest of social cohesion. Parallel to these developments, restrictions on self-defense emerged as part of the nanny state ethos. Governments, focused on eliminating personal risk, implemented measures limiting firearm ownership and other protective tools, asserting that with comprehensive state security, citizens had little need for personal armament. Proponents of such policies argued that fewer weapons would lead to less violence. However, these limitations left law-abiding individuals with fewer means to protect themselves from sudden threats, leading critics to argue that such policies left populations vulnerable, dependent on governmental assurances of safety amidst policies that might have allowed threats to grow unchecked. Freedom of speech also faced contraction, driven by the belief that offensive or provocative speech should be controlled to preserve public harmony. Whether through explicit censorship or societal pressure, this was seen as a necessary compromise for civil discourse. This cultural shift made it challenging to openly critique extremist ideologies without facing accusations of bigotry or intolerance, thereby stifling crucial debates. Overzealous hate speech laws or guidelines, intended to foster unity, often suppress discussions about emerging threats, inadvertently allowing extremist groups to advance their agendas behind a facade of political correctness and institutional negligence. Ultimately, these interconnected developments trace a path from the feminist push for expanded state roles to the full realization of a nanny state, culminating in a societal embrace of socialist principles. This trajectory suggests a society increasingly reliant on government safeguards, while simultaneously diminishing personal defense capabilities and prioritizing inclusivity to the point of overlooking real dangers. Consequently, violent actors found fewer barriers, exploiting lenient immigration policies, reduced ideological scrutiny, and restricted self-defense options. When terror attacks occurred, many found themselves unprepared, unarmed, and unable to voice systemic failures candidly, highlighting how well-intentioned but expansive government control might inadvertently create conditions ripe for security breaches and attacks.